One evening out walking, I saw a divorced couple and their son. Mom was screaming abuse at Dad. Their son, his body language was pulsing distress, distress, distress. His parents never even noticed. This is what we expect divorce to be for our children. But what if we have it wrong? What if divorce doesn't harm children? What if it is a gift? If that question leaves you recoiling, I get it because I was you. No one gets married expecting to divorce. It's until death do us part. Historically, for divorce even to be an option, one of the spouses had to behave very, very badly. Then, no one spoke of it in polite company. In other words, we stigmatized it. We still do. Thus, when a couple is facing divorce, they're ill-equipped. They feel like failures and they don't know what to do. It's terrifying. I remember that terror very well. What made my fear remarkable is that I had practiced family law. I knew the rules, I had been to court, I could even recognize judges on the street. None of it helped. As a lawyer, I had encountered one couple who they needed help. They had to hire a mediator to help them divide their spices. No lie. Their divorce was a power struggle of epic proportion. And that's the model of divorce I knew. It's what we all expect. It's as far from resilience, which is the ability for a person to bounce back from a difficult challenge, as possible for parents and their children. What made this remarkable, of course, do you know a child who has divorced? This is the tough part because I'm asking for your participation. Do you know a child who has experienced divorce? Please raise your hand. I want to see in the dark recesses. Thank you. You can lower your hands. From those hands, I estimate that half of you know a child who has experienced divorce. So there's a real connection in this room to this topic. And it's not surprising because nearly half of all marriages in North America end this way. In 2019, 18% of all Canadian children were experiencing divorce. That's nearly 1.2 million children. These numbers make this a subject worthy of talking about and studying. Now, most of the researchers presume that divorce harms kids. And they always then focus on the problems that the children are experiencing. And some of the things they look at are academic performance, behavioral issues, and emotional dysregulation. They always look at the time period divorce and after divorce. If they consider conflict, well, that's parents fighting in court. Now, some other researchers have taken a broader perspective, and they have actually looked at the impact of conflict on children who have experienced divorce. They don't just define conflict as fighting in court. They take a broad perspective on it. So it includes overt conflict. So you have, of course, like that yelling mom. You have people who hit each other. You have somebody who punches holes in walls. Then you have triangulation, which is when a child feels caught in the middle of a parent's dispute. Now, that's what was happening to that poor boy who was feeling despair and distress. You can also see it when dad says to his 4-year-old daughter, "You have a bad mom." Then there is the silent conflict. And this is something I never recognized. But silent conflict includes things like passive-aggressive behavior and tension between parents. Now, when these researchers looked at the impact of conflict on children who have experienced divorce, one study made a remarkable finding. And that was that up to half of the academic and behavioral problems that these kids were experiencing started at least 4 years before separation. The actual study found it was between 4 and 12 years before the parents stopped living together. So knowing that, is divorce itself the problem, or might it be conflict between parents? Now, to help connect that research to that question, I'm sharing a story from my family. In grade 1, my son started acting out. Gone was the engaged and largely respectful kid he had been. At least weekly, the principal would call me and tell me of his latest transgression. After learning that he had pushed another child down the stairs, I thought by 15, he would be in jail. I couldn't imagine any other trajectory for his life. There was a meeting with the principal and a senior school board official. They told me that unless my boy got the help that they said he needed, he wouldn't be welcome at that school. He would be sent to an alternate school for children with severe issues. I had already consulted an expert who said my son didn't have the issue the principal said he did. Then, the grand finale. The day before the Christmas concert, my son, still in grade 1, was suspended for 2 days. That's when we switched schools and school systems. Yet the problems continued, screaming in class, throwing books, breaking other children's crayons. Once again, I was on a first-name basis with a principal. At the time, to the outside world, his dad and I had a successful marriage. But behind closed doors, there was almost constant tension. This in the place where a child is supposed to be safe. Of course my son kept acting out. The worst moment came at a judo tournament about a year after his dad and I stopped living together. In his first match, his opponent threw him to the mat. Boom! It was over in 2 seconds. My son's response? He screamed at the top of his lungs, "I want him dead!" Everything stopped because everyone heard him. My son has a voice that carries. I pulled him from the room and I gave him heck. But then I did what so many of us do after a traumatic event. I acted as if it never happened. My son stayed in judo. 6 years later, he competed at the Winter Games. While there, another athlete's parents initiated a conversation. They told me how impressed they were with my son. He was respectful, kind, and helpful. Then it came out. It was their boy who my boy had wanted dead. I had completely suppressed that boy's identity. That was the moment when I started thinking about the connection between conflict and children. The first 2 years after our separation were as rocky as our marriage. Separating had been 100% me, and I dragged my husband along. I was not kind or patient. And so, of course, the tension actually increased. But with focusing on our kids, there was a little tiny shift in increments. He agreed to me moving away with the kids so I could attend grad school. We signed a separation agreement. The kids and I moved, then came back. We divorced without fighting in court. At age 12, my son even traveled to Europe with his dad, with my blessing. Divorce hadn't harmed my son. Divorce had been a gift. Because we separated, he started to learn resilience. He could bounce back. And doing so, he changed the trajectory of his life. Instead of going to jail, he attended university. In his final year, he participated in a French immersion program. What was remarkable about that is in the past 8 years, he had only taken 2 university classes, and he immersed himself in that language and passed. Then he graduated with distinction. And currently, he's serving in the reserves of the Canadian Armed Forces. We raised a resilient human. To do so, we had to divorce. But divorce was just the start of it. 2 other factors were equally important. And the first one was we didn't focus on each other's problems, and we stopped hoping the other would change. We never listened to anyone who encouraged us to focus on our legal rights. It was all about what was best for our children. And to that end, right from the start, I always wanted my kids to have the best relationship possible with their father. Yes, I mean, when I say I could hardly stand to look at him, that's an understatement, okay? But I always had that goal that they have the best relationship possible with their dad. Because after all, I knew they would always love him. He's dad. And divorcing this way, we actually discovered that how we treated each other, his dad and me, is what shaped our children and allowed my son to learn resilience. That's what we forget when we usually think about divorce, right? When we encourage someone, oh, you got to fight, you got to protect your legal rights. And it's also what we forget when we encourage that couple where there's so much tension to stay together for the sake of their children. Because the elephant in the room is those children, most likely, they're already being harmed. Now, knowing this, isn't it time to end the stigma of divorce and to speak about what the problem really is? To move beyond the borders of what we expect divorce to be? And I want you to think back about that child you know who has experienced divorce. And I also want you to think of a different child who you know, and it might be an adult you know, but who the scenario you go, oh yeah, this is what happened to this person. This child is struggling. It could be academically, behaviorally, with emotional dysregulation. This is a child living with both parents in a so-called intact family. Think of that child and the child experiencing divorce. Now, what would become possible for either child if their parents better managed or eliminated the conflict, be it through divorce or through taking other steps so they could live together more effectively? How would such a change improve that child's life? What would that change make possible for our world? Thank you.